After I ask these questions, I want you to pause the video for a second and try to come up with your own answers. What kind of things do you think might influence your perception of Japan if you live here as a foreign resident? For example, what do you think might make your experience here a more positive one? What kind of things do you think might make your experience here a negative one? Pause the video and think about it for a second. You can even write down what you think before you watch the rest of the video in the comments below. G'day, I'm John and I'm a foreign resident living here in Nagoya, Japan for the last 13 or so years. But the first time I lived in Japan was actually about 25 years ago in Osaka when I came here on a working holiday visa. A lot has changed over that time, but a lot of things have stayed the same. If you're new to the channel, before I get into the meat of the video, I do something called Word of the Day at the end of the video, where I introduce a Japanese word connected to what we've spoken about so you can learn something new while you're here. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get right into it. Today's video was actually inspired by my friend Tracy. He's over at the channel called Weekly Fascination, and his latest video covers this topic. In his video, he presents a list of things that he thinks can affect how you perceive Japan. And I'm not going to go through everything that he says because that would spoil the fun. You can click on this link over here and watch his video to find that out. What I'm going to do in this video is share my opinion and my experience, and also tell you a little bit about what I feel can make a difference for your experience here in Japan as a foreign resident. Okay, so the first one I'm going to touch on is language. And I have mentioned the importance of language, in my opinion, and how it has made a huge difference to my life in Japan, especially in two very powerful ways, which I speak about in detail in a video which I'll link here as well for you, so you can check that out. Very, very difficult time for me was made a lot easier by being able to speak Japanese. And the other one is more of a heartwarming, happy thing in my life that was made possible by speaking Japanese. So I believe it's a very, very important part of life. Also, people here expect you to understand at least a minimum level of Japanese. You don't have to be perfect. And this is actually another video that I want to make in the future. What is a suitable level of Japanese for foreign residents? What kind of expectations do the locals have here of us? And what kind of Japanese do you need to get by? So you really need to understand that it doesn't need to be perfect. Oftentimes I think about this and I think, you know what, the Japanese are actually a lot more lenient than us Australians are back home in Sydney sometimes. If someone can't speak English very well, we're sometimes very hard on them as a people. It depends on the person, obviously, but in general, if someone can't understand basic or intermediate level English, a lot of people will complain about that or make a fuss. Whereas in Japan, if someone had that similar level of Japanese, they would be praised, So it's really quite different. And I think people here really appreciate it when people make an effort. So keep that in mind and don't worry if your Japanese isn't perfect. It will take time. It takes a very long time to master Japanese. And it's not something you should be hard on yourself about. So language is number one. I think this is going to make a huge difference on whether or not you see Japan in a negative light or a positive light. That's just my opinion. Next, I want to talk about this thing called Shuhari. What the hell is Shuhari? Maybe some of you know about it. It's a word or a concept that is sometimes used in martial arts or in religion or philosophy. And I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail about it. I'll put a Wikipedia link to the entry because there's a fantastic Wikipedia entry, of course, and you can learn all about it there. But I'm just going to break it down and explain how I feel it relates to living in Japan and being adaptable and flexible and being a bit more, open-minded here as a foreign resident. So Shuhari is a process going from beginner to advanced to master level. Okay. Now, the reason why it's applied to things like martial arts is because the first character, Shu, it actually means to adhere to. And this is because you're abiding by all of the rules word for word. Okay. And the next step is Ha, which means to break. Okay. Now, to break doesn't mean like breaking plates or breaking mirrors, not bad things, but breaking rules, and not in a bad way. You're breaking the rules after you know how to do things the right way. So first, you perfect the basics by following the rules word for word. Once you reach that stage and you can do everything exactly as it's described, then you can go and start breaking those rules. But you know what the limitations are, you know what's accepted, and you know what's expected of you. So you're not going to go and do crazy things. You're going to stay sort of within reason, but you are going to break those rules a little and you're going to push some boundaries. Next is ri, which means to leave or to depart from. And so this means complete innovation. You're leaving everything behind and you're innovating. You're doing something completely on your own. And this concept is actually really important, I feel. You can apply it to a lot of things in life. You can apply it to things like cooking, for example. First, you follow a recipe, then you start, trying some new spices and herbs, and then you go completely nuts and you start inventing new cooking methods, for example, okay? It's a good way to remember how this works. Now, in the context of living in Japan, look at it this way. There are a whole bunch of rules here. Another friend of mine, Paul, over at X Chapter, he put out a video recently about how separating trash is like a test for foreigners to see whether or not they can do things properly. Now, that's a good example. So imagine that there are these rules about rubbish, okay? You need to learn how to follow these things. Some of these rules, by the way, they might not make sense to you. Here's a good example, okay? This is an extreme example, and I hope no workplace does this to you, but this is the level of weirdness or wackiness that can happen in certain situations here. Imagine you're at work and your boss tells you to copy a certain body of text from one document to another document. Now, the quickest way that you can think of, or most people can think of, is to select the text, copy it, go over to the other document and paste it. Okay, done. It's like 2 seconds. But let's say your boss tells you that you can't do that and that that's not the best way and that you have to print out the document, put the document on your table and type it out again onto a fresh Word document. You'd probably be very, very puzzled, and you have every right to be. We've all been there. And this is me just sharing my wisdom with you from my own experience, okay? Because I've suffered and I've suffered the consequences and I'd like to help you. So imagine that you think it's crazy to print it out and to type it up. But let's say after about 6 months in the company, you realize that there was a reason for that. And it might be a crazy reason, but there will be a reason for it. I can almost guarantee you. It might not be the reason that you want to hear, and it might not make much sense to you, but there will be a reason. So stick with these rules, as crazy as they may seem. If the rule's there and your boss is telling you to do it that way and that that's the way it's done, it's not really your place to make a fuss and to scream and to jump up and down and try to change the rules. Your good intentions and your eagerness will be appreciated by your boss and your peers, I'm sure, but the hassle that you will cause by raising your voice and causing a fuss is going to be even worse, okay? It's not really the kind of thing you want to be known for, as that's the guy who questioned our copy-paste rule, okay? And look, it takes time. And this is where the ha comes in, knowing when to break that. So after a while, you can actually start to read the room. This is another thing that usually comes up in the context of living in Japan, is this KY, they call it, kuki yomenai. It means not being able to read the air. So people who are KY have a lot of difficulty. And I've been KY every now and then. And I think we all get a bit KY. But it's not always a bad thing. It's just learning, it's experience. And once you start building the ability to read the air, you can actually start to figure out when you can stand up and raise your voice and say that this whole copy-paste rule is ridiculous and that it should be changed. Maybe there's a certain person that you need to tell this to. Maybe it's not something you should, just blurt out when everyone's there. Maybe you should wait for the right time. Maybe it needs to be at a certain meeting on a certain day of the week. And maybe that's where the change will happen. Or maybe you have to build a reputation and you have to earn the respect and the trust, and people need to trust you with that decision to change the rule. Okay, there are all kinds of reasons behind things. And sometimes it's just the way it is. It's ridiculous, but sometimes it's just the status quo. That's the way it is. I remember once someone told me they were working in this manufacturing plant, and there was this bottle of kerosene at a certain location in the factory line. And no one knew why it was there. Everyone asked everyone, and these guys went in. These guys were an external company and they had been contracted and they were there to review the processes and things, and they started asking around. We're trying to streamline the system. We found that there's this bottle of kerosene on the bench over here. We're trying to find out why it's there. They asked everyone, and no one knew the answer. No one, absolutely no one. They checked, was it being used? No, it wasn't being used. It just sat there. And also it had to be refilled when it evaporated, or if it spilled or whatever. There was a part in the procedure that said it had to be checked, and if it was below a certain level, it had to be refilled. So these things actually do exist. And I don't think it's only in Japan that these things exist. I mean, there are, factories all around the world that have crazy rules, I'm sure. But it's a good example that illustrates how wacky some of these things can be. But you will encounter situations where it'll be like, you could just do something verbally, but no, there's a form for it. You have to print out the form. You have to fill it out. You have to get it stamped by 3 people in management, and it has to be approved by the department head. And you'll have to wait until all of that's been approved before you can go ahead and buy that stapler. Okay, so these things do exist, but it's important to keep an open mind, a very open mind. Okay, sorry for blabbering on, but that's my experience with that one. Now, I also want to say that it's important as an immigrant, and this doesn't just apply to us here in Japan, it's any immigrant, living overseas, is to be open-minded. Sometimes you'll face situations where you might have to do something a different way, a way that you've never done before in your life. And it can feel uncomfortable. It can feel really weird sometimes, really awkward, or, it just doesn't feel right for whatever reason. But the longer you stay here and the longer you do things that way, you actually get used to it, okay? So I know it's depressing sometimes. I know it can be hard. I know it can really push your buttons. And I mean, we've all been there. A lot of us who have been here long term, we've all been there. And this is why a lot of us don't smile as much as we used to when we first came here. I'm joking. But really, it's, there was another video I was watching by the Japan channel, I think it's called, another Aussie guy. Actually here in Aichi Prefecture, I think I realized when I was looking at his video the other day. And he mentions that, it's very different. When you come here on a holiday, it's very different to living here. And once you realize that it's not the same, it can actually be a little bit depressing. Okay, so there's everyone faces this reality check moment where we realize that, hey, it's just another country and life here is not as Peter Panish as we believed it was. Now, another thing I want to talk about is looks. Tracy mentioned this in his video, and I thought it was a very interesting observation. And while I don't agree with, people judging people on looks, as Tracy said, we don't make the rules here. It's just how it is. People who are better looking seem to do better. But this is something that's not, exclusive to Japan, I feel, but it does exist. Now, another thing I want to talk about, and I don't have any kind of hard evidence about this, so I actually want to ask you guys about what you think about this one. Help me out, because it's something that I don't really talk about with anyone else, and it sort of hit me when I was thinking about this stuff recently, and it's something that has come up in the past. And I actually put out a bit of information a couple of years ago or a year ago on my X account about advice in Japan. And, there was this thing that came up where while looks are important, it's not really like, how good looking you are. It's more how much effort you put into looking good, if that makes sense. And I feel like, and I'm not sure, this is the part I want help with. Is it true, or do you agree with the statement that in our countries, or when I say our countries, I'm from Australia, so I only know Australia. So if you're an Australian, what do you think about this statement? Do you think that in Australia, we judge based on absolute criteria, not relative criteria? Whereas in Japan, I feel like society is more, I won't say everyone, because there are people who are very judgmental based on looks, like they're very superficial. But I feel as a whole, as a society, I feel like Japan is more capable of judging based on relative criteria. And I don't even know if I'm using the right terminology here, so I'm going to try and explain myself. So when I say judging by absolute criteria, I mean like someone judging you based on how fast you can run a 100-meter sprint, okay, versus someone judging you on how hard you tried to run that 100-meter sprint. So I feel like in Japan, they look at you as, relative to your own ability. So if it's the best that you can do, and they know that, and you've improved on your previous sprint time, they'll praise that and recognize it. Whereas in Australia, I feel like it's more like no one will praise you unless you reach X seconds for that 100 meters. And I realize this is a very subjective thing, and it's just based on my own observation and experience. So this could be a very heavily biased statement or observation. It could be a total, it could be total rubbish. So I'd like to know what your experience is on this, because I seriously haven't really talked about this concept with anyone else. And it's just something I feel personally as someone living here, that people here will put a bit more thought into assessing you when something comes up, and be it with work or with personal relationships or whatever, people tend to put a bit more thought into the reasoning behind their decisions or their opinions. Okay, it's a very, what's the word? It's like it's analytical instead of just being based on reaction. Like, oh, he's fast, So yeah, that's something that came up, and I'd love to explore that concept or that idea, maybe in future videos, I don't know, but I'm really curious to know what you guys think about that. Is it just me who has experienced that, or do other people out there also feel that that's how it is here in Japan? Because I really do feel like, even if you're not good looking, and this came up because Tracy mentioned how good looking people have it easier or have it better. And that can be true in a lot of cases. And it's something that, isn't good, but that's the way it works, right? But the thing is, though, if that's the only quality you have, I feel like it won't hold up very long. So you really do have to have other skills as well. And that's something else that can actually contribute to your quality of life here, is being a good person, having a good character, being a hard worker and doing your best all the time. These things are valued highly. And I think these are valued everywhere in the world, not just in Japan. But I feel like the difference between how much value there is between that and looks, I feel like they're weighted a lot more evenly here in Japan. And like I said, I could be heavily biased in my opinion because it's only based on my experience, not based on anyone else's. So I'd really love to know what you guys think about that. Anyway, I've rambled on for long enough, and it's time for word of the day. So today's word of the day, I've already let it slip. It's Shuhari. And it's not really a word. You can't really translate that. It's more like the process of going from beginner to master. And as I mentioned already, I'll just quickly cover it again. The shu means to obey or to abide by or to adhere to. Ha is to break, and that's because you're going to break some rules. And then ri is to sort of leave or to depart from, or, to leave behind, basically, because you're innovating. You're leaving behind all of those rules and you're doing something completely on your own in your own style. Okay. And again, this is usually used in the context of martial arts and philosophy, but I'd like to apply it to this particular conversation as well, because I think it is important when you first come to Japan, it's important to obey the rules first. And when I say rules, I don't mean only, laws and regulations, but social rules, things like not littering or not speaking loudly on the train or not speaking on the phone in the train. These aren't laws. I don't think you can get arrested for using the phone on a train, but people will give you the look. But it's important to obey these rules and follow them and then get a feel for what things are like. Truly, you have to perfect these first. And I mean, I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. We all, screw up every now and then, but you've got to do your best, okay? And after you reach a certain point, you'll start to know when those things can be bent. It's kind of like the Matrix. Have you seen the Matrix where the guy's bending the spoon around? Once you understand how things work, you can start bending things around and breaking the rules a bit. We're not talking about laws. Don't break any laws, please. But there are certain norms and things. Remember in the conversation earlier on, I mentioned maybe it's not good to raise a certain issue in front of everyone in the office. But once you learn how it's done, maybe you can bring it up with a certain key person in the office in a meeting room one day. Okay, when you guys are sort of out of sight, and maybe things can be done that way. And then maybe one day you'll be the boss and you can innovate, or maybe you'll start your own business here one day and you'll innovate and do things in your own way while being aware of the norms, which is very important. There's a big difference between just doing random crazy things and doing really innovative things that stay within the framework but are completely new and completely innovative. Okay, like with the cooking example again, you can be innovative, but you can't start throwing food around the room, and throw a plate of something against the wall and tell the customer to lick it off the wall. That's not going to happen. There are rules. There's a framework. Okay, generally that involves a plate and some cutlery. Although I have been to a couple of restaurants where they just throw everything on the table on a big sheet or something. I think it was a dessert somewhere, and that does happen. But it still involved cutlery. Okay, so there's still that. Anyway, I'm blabbering on and it's time to go. Thanks very much for tuning in, and if you'd like to support my channel, please subscribe and like the video and share the video with your friends if you have anyone in your friend circle who's interested in life in Japan or language or all that kind of stuff. You know what to do. All right, I'll catch you at the next video. Bye for now.